About 100 years ago, longer is not possible for people who haven't studied business administration, swarms of Melanopus spretus, you may remember your Latin lesson at school, known as the Rocky Mountain locust, laid waste to wide areas of the American Midwest, devouring every plant in their paths of destruction, and thus naturally evoking reference to the biblical plagues of Egypt. Today, Melanopus spretus is considered extinct. But a leading member of the German Social Democratic Party back in 2005 compared the destructive and ruthless behavior of some anonymous hedge fund investment managers to that of a plague of locusts. The metaphor immediately caught on. Now, nothing good has ever come to comparing human beings to animals in a pejorative way, and I do not wish to make use of this rhetoric here. So rather than elaborating on the metaphor employed, I would like to focus on the notion inspired by this metaphor. We've been already back to the financial crisis. So during the global financial crisis starting 2007 and 2008, when after the burst of the US housing bubble, many banks and businesses around the world went down the drain in a crescendo of chain-linked insurances and loans, people not invested with expert knowledge, we didn't know each other before, about the working of the stock market system tended to direct their obvious questions. How could this happen? Not so much at the structures and underlying principles of the free market or capitalism in general, but rather at the people, the bankers, the stockbrokers, the managers, the politicians, who apparently were all too willing to carry out schemes which they must have known were mostly, to talk in question and in some instance downright illegal. Also, we all know, systems, firm policies, structures, cultures are shaping mindsets and behaviors, but it is too easy to blame only the boundary conditions. So the question, how could this happen, became, how could someone do this? Meaning, how could someone with a high-class education from business schools, degrees from the best universities in the world, be so underdeveloped in their moral faculties? And so as you all know, this question hit home at the very institution too. Of course, some of the bankers involved in the financial landslide, not only in Switzerland, were chaired by managers with a St. Gallen degree. This is not an accusation. This is simple statistics. So why of all managers didn't even these have moral standards that prevented them from making profit from other people's financial ruin? And the simple truth is because they never learned that moral standards count when it comes to be successful as a profession. Because in their academic development, they came to accept the distinction between the subject matter of their studies and their personal worldviews. Even more than that, because they came to the conclusion that personal morals can only be a hindrance to success. Wouldn't Hamlet have been more successful if he had acted more according to his professional instincts, that is, being the rightful heir to the throne, and less according to his moral ones? Was not his uncle, the usurper Claudius, the more successful of the two? This is not a singular phenomenon, nor is it restricted to the world of finance, nor to academia. There are black sheep among highly educated professionals in all trades, and making a distinction between success and morals does not necessarily result in criminal activities. But surely the lack, or at least waning of commonly shared moral coordinating systems at the foundation of the worldview must have consequences. These moral coordinate systems do not necessarily have to be rooted in religion. But it is true that the world religions have traditionally been important sources of the belief that there is more to human beings than their achievements. And while it is also true that religions, or rather their manifestations in man-made administrative structures, have repeatedly been the cause for much woe and violence, the idea that a good life, that is, a life that brings to fulfillment one's very specific personality, talents and interests, and in which one is able to be oneself, that is, good life cannot be self-made after all, but comes as a gift, is a thought inherent in the teachings of all world religions. In Christianity, this concept is called grace. In other religions, it goes by different names and different connotations. But in all instances, a human being is seen as being reliant on something beyond their doing. And because of this reliance as being obligated to adhere to a set of moral principles guiding one's moral judgment and consequent behavior. But what does this entail? Fundamentally, this reference to a higher ground of value has two consequences for an assessment of achievement. Firstly, it humbles every achievement because it postulates that the worth of a human being does not depend on their accomplishments. This is not to be misunderstood as a devaluation of achievements, nobody would believe me, but should be seen as a contextualization. Achievements are one facet of the human being's personality, not more, not less. Secondly, this dethroning of the common notion of achievements is the very basis for a stronger emphasis of its value. Because achievements and the preceding developments of persons' faculties is understood to be a facet of every personality, it can function as a parameter in distinguishing between different levels of abilities and as a goal for the process of developing these abilities. Because one might say that there is more to a person than achievement, it is safe to attribute value to it. Conversely, as long as a person is seen as nothing more than the sum of their achievements, this assessment of a person will always tend to be merciless and thus inhumane and degrading. Then, a person without accomplishments will be seen as worthless. And from this point of view, any achievement would be justified. King Claudius and the locusts would be in the right. They have an achievement. The concept fundamentally opposing the social Darwinism knows many names. One being goodwill, which is used in a religion tradition to describe a peaceable attitude towards one's neighbors, a sense of social responsibility and the persuasion that one is to protect the environment through one's personal lifestyle is called sustainability, and there are a lot of others. So what happens when the former sources of the good, holistic notion about the concept of personhood and the contextualized notion of achievement, mainly the world religions, are in the process of losing their persuasive influence on society, at least in the sense that their authority of interpretation in relation to what makes a person can no longer be seen as a homogeneous and commonly accepted building bricks of society. Family and schools, too, are the providers they used to be for this kind of education. And there comes the Beilage in Neue Zürcher Zeitung, roughly 2 weeks ago, wrote recently that there was a dramatic decline in the number of students choosing the traditional humanist study course to lead to their Matura, from roughly 25% A and B Matura at the same age group in 1999 when we did starting the reform here, that this number dropped down to around 5% in 2011. The vast majority today opts in favor of subjects like foreign languages, economics or science. Don't get me wrong, this is much to be said in favor of the modern course, especially when we think about the specific jobs they may lead to. But if we pause for a moment to ponder what kind of questions and trains of thoughts we typically associate with humanistic subjects like history, theology, old languages, we cannot help agreeing, especially if we think back to our own school days, that it was during these lessons we discussed topics touching at the very existential level of humanity and read texts that we couldn't understand, but that would try to approach some of these fundamental questions of human existence. We can also tell from experience that, generally speaking, it was these students who would bring a very profound skill of comprehending and interpreting different trains of thoughts into the discussions, not only in this room of debating in universities, but to a lot of others. So this skill has proven to be an essential motor of seminar discussions, and thus crucial basis for what a seminar group or what a Neukonzeption die Lehre or what, a kind of modern business training can achieve within a set curriculum. The absence of these skilled interpreters and debaters, they have other skills Vincent mentioned before, this too we all have noticed again and again, can lead to an underperformance of the whole seminar group. So consequently, it can be argued there is a decidedly strong correlation between the traditional humanist canon of subjects and discourses and a commitment to performance and achievement. In socialization through upbringing, school or commonly shared belief systems no longer necessarily includes fundamental principles of this kind that will function as guiding in a pluralistic world and within a multi-optional society, but which are recognized as being essential for an equally human and notion of achievement and ability. How can society guarantee that these principles be learned? The answer to this question is as obvious as simple. In the university, which are called to provide on this function. A second thought, if the above elaborations around already suggest that the necessity of an additional dimension of education, an education that takes fundamental themes of human existence and the contemplation of moral coordinating systems at the basis of the capacity of well-founded judgment, there will also be a general agreement on the notions that the problems society faces have changed, or rather that issues hidden from view because of other, more pressing problems have acquired a new urgency because these problems have been solved. These are the traditional problems we have in the development of techniques to increase efficiency in production processes or other time-consuming tasks. A development that characteristics our time. Today, in a society based on the division of labor, and with technologies at hand facilitating almost every production process, a person can produce a multiple of their actual output as an individual in other societies before. With the urgent problem of the procurement of livelihood thus out of the way for most members of society, other problems take their place in our collective awareness. One such problem, the question of the worth of human being in relation to their achievements and performance, I have already outlined. A second urgent question arises from the increasing impact of social media on our everyday lives and on our collective communication. The notion of privacy is called into question with every new app installed on our Facebook account. This phenomenon would be as foolish as to underestimate the fundamental change that our concepts of person, of privacy and the public have undergone already and will further undergo in the near future. To be able to discuss these phenomena, to come up with concepts to control and shape these developments, and to take courage for the implementation of these concepts, certain abilities are needed, which we most assume are no longer trained in young people by society in general, schools or families in particular. What is needed then is a new educational theme, the teaching of an integrative system of thoughts combining a positive assessment of achievement and ability at the starting point to developing the latter, and simultaneously a contextualization and grounding of these parameters, of embedding them in a large system of values. It is the task even more difficult for contextual studies than more than 10 years ago of every modern university taking responsibility for today's civil society to embrace this theme and fill it with life. Higher education taking into account not only cognitive faculties and academic achievements, but personal development and the learning of values and other existential entities could be differentiated into three categories according to different ends. Education towards knowledge, the expert. Education towards a profession, what we try to achieve or students want to achieve. And education towards life, which will be the topic here. While the first two categories have already been well established as central concerns of higher education, it is the third category I would like to focus on for the remaining couple of minutes of my elaborations. If my claims up to the point are correct, we can establish that the skills we might call life skills, and which university education is obligated to develop these days in their students, in addition to knowledge and professional skills, can be further distinguished into three I's. The skill of interpretation, the skill of integration, and the skill of innovation. All essentials for interacting with and making a difference in a multi-optional society. Integrational skills are needed to be able to incorporate different and at times authentic thoughts into one's own coherent, authentic and consistent worldview, to ponder two conflicting opinions and synthesize a logical third standpoint as a new stepping stone for further discussion. Interpretational skills are closely linked to integrational skills, but aim more at the comprehension of different trains of thoughts and the ability to recognize and research the background information needed in order to be able to grasp the core of what a train of thought, be it in the form of text or spoken languages, implies. Innovation skills, finally, are skills needed to implement change, to set in motion developments resulting from conclusions made on the basis of the first two sets of skills. Now universities already know some methods of how to elicit these skills from their students, and in some cases have been established consistent structures to develop these skills further. Still, as can be deduced from our introductory example, there is still room for improvement, there always is. And rather than merely piling exoration on exoration, I would like to make a few suggestions for additional measures to encourage and inspire students to develop their I skills. My first proposals concern the establishing of reading courses dealing with the selection of central philosophical texts constituting a canon of schools of thoughts. A university has decided on the basis of its specific profile. Tutors and mentors should guide the students' reading process and help them train their abilities to make sense of unknown discourses and their specific wording and scope. More importantly, students should be encouraged to engage in discussions about the ideas that encountered and to contrast them rapidly with the assumptions, concepts and views they have already made their own. A second measure, students should be required to keep a journal about their progress through their studies as a motivation, and at times perhaps as a provocation, to reflect on how their learning process develops and how what they have learned influences the way they perceive the world. Again, this task should not be unguided, as the student's reflection should be aligned along certain questions, challenging enough to foster self-awareness. In fact, it would be most valuable to have the students hand in their journals, perhaps after a certain period, and have tutors and mentors from the academic faculty talk to them about how they themselves experience their progress. We know one tool from Timo, for example, for it. As a third proposal, in order to inspire the application of theoretical and unutilized knowledge to practical contexts, the student should get involved in larger projects, whether they include individual planning or teamwork, which can revolve around topics of entrepreneurship or voluntary social work, or taking the form of studies abroad. The experience of having to find one's bearing in an unfamiliar context, and we do this at Leuphana for, history students in the business context and the other way around, will have an important impact on shaping the student's personality, as these contexts provide challenges the students' everyday lives seldom hold. What is more, is the time of actively investing their talents and capabilities in something genuinely their own, the students may learn that it is action that make a personality, and then that conversely their personality will be expressed through their actions and is not something apart. One of the most dire consequences of the degree factories universities are in danger of becoming due to the sheer mass of students they are forced to take in on the decrease in personal contact between academic faculty and students. Personal interaction has mostly been replaced by some streamlined tests resulting in numbers denoting performance and personal development. While this cannot be entirely undone because of the efficiency demanded of modern universities by government and cantonal supervising boards, at least at the clothing of the student's course of study, this being my fourth suggestion, a personal colloquium between student and academic faculty should be held, addressing and encompassing not only the student's acquired knowledge, but also his other faculties and skills, namely those of integration and interpretation mentioned earlier. This could be a kind of bachelor thesis colloquium combining, contextual studies and core discipline studies. A fifth and final proposal concerns what could be called big issues, events accompanying the student's progress through university at given intervals, during which they will have to work together in teams on given topics of import, either related to their own situation or concerning central problems society currently faces. These project works phases will at least have two aims. Firstly, students will have another occasion to train their social faculties and organizational skills. Secondly, these activities hold a promise of failure, perhaps one of the most valuable experiences to be made during one's adolescence years, and afterwards too. I think a compelling argument can be made in favor of the notion that if students have never experienced failure and overstress, and thus have never learned to cope with a situation in which the demand on their performances proves too great to be met, they will be more easily be susceptible to corruption simply as the only way of escape they think of. So we have to develop new ways of escaping a situation of pressure. To become familiar with its very own limits and limitations must be seen as strength, not as a weakness. The moment of truth, the realization of the fitness of one's own possibilities, and at the same time the unlimited worth of oneself regardless of one's achievements, bring me to my parting thought. Universities are undergoing a process of constant change, emulating the ever-changing nature of society, supporting it and striving to meet its demands. Over the years of financial dependency, universities have learned to handle these demands and adapt not only their curriculums, their organizational structures and their behavioral patterns to the system which will keep them afloat and sustained. Wouldn't it be wonderful if universities, those age-old guardians of culture and knowledge, could come into their own again, if they could rear their graying hairs and proclaim in a voice of calm self-confidence. And I will invite you to use this self-confidence for the debates the following 2 days on thoughts and talks about the 3 I skills: interpretation, innovation, and integration, the very heart of humanities. Thank you.